Are you considering the transition to a largely remote workforce? If you do transition, then you, as a leader, have to actually believe that your employees can be effective when working remotely, or you have to at least be willing to give it an honest try. Otherwise, you'll just be wasting everybody's time. But if you do think that your team can work productively in a remote environment, and you want to reap some of the economic and productivity benefits that remote work affords, then check out this video in which I share some of the hard lessons learned by remote teams so that your team can perform at a high level. I'm Dan Himes, founder of Study Swami and Biz Work Life. Let's talk about three different categories of this work from home situation: the attitude of management, keeping the team productive, and the equipment needed to make it all work. From the management's point of view, the way to approach this is for the company or team to think in terms of being remote first. A remote workforce won't have the same benefit as an office-based workforce, but with the right push by the leaders, it can still be a great experience, in some ways better. The only way you can do that is to make sure there is no social or professional advantage, including FaceTime with the boss, for coming on site. The moment that starts to happen, your remote workers become second-class citizens of your team and will be marginalized. Even if you have a physical office, everybody should be considered to be a remote worker, but some people show up on site sometimes. Imagine a situation where you're in a conference room. Part of your team is there and the rest have dialed in. You're presenting, but when someone around the table asks a question, the remote folks can't hear. Now you, as a manager, have to make it your mission to make sure they can hear. You start with asking, "Tony, did you hear that?" where Tony's at home. Or better, when someone asks a question, you remind them then to speak into the microphone. This sends the direct message that you're on board. If you have to wait for Cindy, who's working at home, to text Jamal and say the mic isn't picking up the room, then you're sending the message that the folks at home have to fend for themselves. In other words, they're second-class citizens. And the team will do what they see you do. If it matters to you, it'll matter to them. If you can't quite beat trouble to pay attention and make it your concern, neither will they. And that will destroy the advantage of remote work. Beyond just setting the tone of remote first, managing will have some other challenges. If you see your primary job as making sure that your team can do its job, then one of your new challenges is figuring out when someone is stuck and needs help. You'll need good, risk-free communication, and pay more attention than you might otherwise to project management. If your company has billable hours, then you are already time tracking. But if you don't have billable hours, you may want to consider implementing time tracking. So let's say you implement time tracking. The next question is, how do you deal with workers suddenly feeling like you don't trust them? One way is to encourage open timesheets, including yours. When people see that you're willing to do what you're asking of them, then they trust you. And once the trust factor is no longer an issue, you might find that your team actually becomes much more efficient. I talk about this on an individual level in my time management course. Keeping a time log is my number one go-to productivity hack when I find myself not working efficiently. A key driver of productivity is morale, and there are things you can do to build the morale of a remote team. The central concept is to build an online social environment where people can have fun and interact with each other. You can think of them as virtual water cooler chats. You can have people share photos of the remote work environments at their battle stations. You can have a picture of the week of something outside of work. People can chat about movies or shows or music or hopefully someday sports, whatever they're inspired to chat about. The important thing here, more than the subject, is that you participate in these informal online conversations also. Make sure the team members feel encouraged to participate when they have time to, just like in what we call meet space. You may want to schedule team check-ins where you talk about anything but work, so people can get to know each other. And we can have a return of once a month Friday beer hour where nobody has to drive home afterwards.
Oh, beer! Look, it's your beer.
Hey, it's already gone.
Oh, he likes?
As far as the team members themselves go, you should encourage your workers to have rituals to start and end their days. It doesn't have to be much, but it should be something that says, "I'm getting down to work," and another one that says, "I'm done for the day." It could be as simple as cleaning the computer screens or wiping down the desk area or hand washing a coffee cup, but there needs to be a ritual that signals the boundaries of time. Communicating electronically has its own style, and with many more people doing it, let's not forget some of the old rules. I've been doing this since the 1980s, so hear me out. The most important rule is to always practice the principle of charity. This means, in a nutshell, that if you can read what somebody wrote two ways, one way that signals good intention, and another way that is upsetting or pisses you off, choose to read it the first way. Emoticons or emojis go a long way towards signaling when we are kidding or whatever, and I encourage their use in internal communications, even though it might seem less than professional. But it can still happen that we misinterpret someone's intent and allow bad feelings to foster. Usually that person wasn't trying to be a jackass, but if you read it that way and hold a grudge, then the relationship will be spoiled. Hence, we always extend the charity to the author. And if the sender was truly trying to be a jackass, you'll find that out soon enough. The second rule is to over-communicate. Being succinct is great, but not at the expense of clarity. Making someone struggle to parse your meaning and intent will not work in your favor. Even if what you write is logical and complete in some logical or mathematical sense, if somebody else misses a nuance or assumes one, then whether or not you're in the right, your mission will fail. Let's say your team is working for a client and expects payment for the completion of phase 1 of a project. Phase 2 is on track, but your team did hit a snag. That's part of life, and you're completely confident that the team will solve it. You ask the team member Kelly to ping the client's representative to get an estimated pay date for phase 1, but in the call she gets chatty and lets on about the challenge of phase 2. The next thing you know, you're spending an uncomfortable 15 or 20 minutes reassuring the client's representative that phase 2 is just fine and these challenges are normal. What went wrong?
We have sort of a problem here.
Well, when you messaged Kelly, you didn't let her know not to let on about the challenge. It was no big deal to her, but definitely concerned the client. If Kelly was in the office, she could have inferred from the mood of the room and intuitively known not to talk about this issue. But because she's remote, all these subtle things need to be made explicit.
Yeah. You see, we're putting the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out. Did you see the memo about this? Yeah.
So the moral of this story is to over-communicate. Communicate not only what you want, but if it's important, also what you don't want. Another thing you want to tell your team is to keep their egos out of things. This is great professional advice in general, but it's very important when people are working remotely. The last thing you need is to have someone upset and not responding while they're remote, and you have no idea that something's even wrong. All the other things we've said can help avert that problem. But convincing or teaching people to keep their egos out of things, keep it from getting personal, will make everything else a lot easier. We've discussed managing and we've discussed team members. So what about the technical side of pulling off a remote team? Well, you're probably quite familiar with Zoom or one of the other video conferencing packages out there, which most teams would consider to be essential. And make sure that everybody is in video on mode. People who hide look like cowards to the rest of us. You'll also want a way to text or chat and message in groups that everybody can jump on. Slack and Microsoft Teams are popular choices for this, but there are also other choices. In terms of brainstorming and whiteboarding, a lot of groups are using the video whiteboard capability of Zoom or Google Jamboard and a Wacom tablet, which is like a large touchpad and stylus, or even an iPad. In fact, there are tons of products out now that are super cheap or even free. I've been impressed with Excalidraw personally. Of course, for a quick diagram, you can simply draw on a piece of paper and hold it up to the camera. I'll close this off with a small warning. The dream of having employees around the world working remotely has more than just a problem of time zones. In some countries and even states, you may be required to keep a legal presence in the area the worker lives. Now, if they're contractors, this may not be as much of a problem. But if they're employees, you definitely need to be careful. Rest assured, though, that just as services arose to handle the local presence issues for incorporating in, say, Delaware when you're located in Kansas, services are also arising to solve this problem for hiring remotely. You should probably check with a lawyer. I hope this video helps you organize your thoughts around reopening with remote workers. If you're looking at this video thinking that won't work, then remember the words of Henry Ford. The man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both right.